Hey, the Eagles signed a wide receiver who's actually a former second-round pick. However, just what kind of outlook does he have to make the roster? And either way, there is an argument to be made for this being the perfect place for him. In this video, I'll cover what that is and why BG is confident in Nolan Smith becoming the next vocal leader of the defense. Plus a couple other top 30 visits, why those would be dangerous for the rest of the league, and an interesting draft twist that hardly anyone's talking about. So how about we talk about it? But first, let's run it. What's up, guys? Alright, the Eagles actually made a move, and apologies, but our family got hit again by some sort of sickness, so late getting this one up. Anyway, you're probably well aware by now that that move was for the Carolina Panthers' former second-round pick Terrace Marshall, which really makes all the sense in the world, especially when you consider that Howie Roseman showed significant interest in the 6'3", 205-pound mismatch ahead of the 2021 draft. Remember, Marshall was actually the top receiver prospect in the country despite suffering a dislocated ankle and fractured leg during his senior year of high school, where then he went on to play at LSU and was a significant factor playing alongside Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson with Joe Burrow at quarterback. I mean, heck, the dude had 46 catches for 671 yards and 13 touchdowns during the national championship campaign, and then followed that season up with 48 receptions for 731 yards and 10 touchdowns through only 7 games. However, Marshall then decided to opt out for the rest of the season and focus on the draft. Here's the thing, when Marshall was focused and locked into play, he was practically unstoppable in college, featuring a 40 time of 4.4 and one of the best athletic profiles in his entire draft class. So it's no surprise that many scouts graded him out as a guy that would eventually be a plus starter. Yet the issue is that his focus and intensity definitely left a lot to be desired, and he could sometimes appear to be just going through the motions. Anyway, Marshall was then drafted by the Carolina Panthers in the second round, but with Sam Darnold throwing to him for a couple seasons and then Bryce Young after that, it's understandable that he hasn't exactly panned out.
Hey, let's see what you got. Hit me, I'm open. Hi. That's why. Now sit down and shut up.
Okay, wait, you're right. Maybe Sam Darnold wasn't exactly the issue because he did a heck of a job in Minnesota, or at least until they reached the postseason last year. And either way, I'm not saying Marshall's going to turn into a breakout stud or some major contributor in this offense. After all, John Dotson had much better numbers from his first couple years in the league and only ended up with 19 catches for 216 yards in the regular season last year. Granted, we clearly saw some more trust and responsibility given to him in the later we got into the postseason. So with a full offseason to go, maybe he takes it up to another level. Here's the thing with Marshall. The Eagles signed him to a minimal 1-year deal, and when you look at Philly's depth chart, he could be the perfect backup option on the outside if AJ ever has to miss a game or two. But yes, having said that, and with just 67 catches for 808 yards and 1 touchdown in 43 games played so far, Marshall is probably a lot closer to a practice squad guy than he is for a solidified role. Still, these are exactly the chances you take in the offseason, so, we'll see if the second-round pick turns out. Also, speaking of second-round picks, Cooper DeJean was seen working out with Ryan Clark and definitely got the better of him during this drill. On that topic, reminder, I'm going to be giving away this signed Cooper DeJean helmet to one lucky subscriber as soon as the channel gets to 125,000 subscribers. So again, do me a favor, hit the like button and make sure you're subscribed. I mean, come on, with all the giveaways we have on the channel, plus the crazy ones for the draft planned, it's surprising to see that there's still nearly 45% of you who regularly watch the channel and aren't subscribed. So with it being free, just go down there, double check, make sure you're subscribed, and make sure you're entered. Alright, the other thing I was going to mention about Marshall, and just to not completely write him off as a non-contributor, is look at who he's going to join in the wide receiver room. Like seriously, this goes for just about the entire locker room, but when you see the grind and daily work that A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith put in to lead that room, it no doubt changes people. Plus, if you're not exactly sure about the message the guys may send, AJ recently spoke to college students at Miami University, and he's for sure going to be giving out the best advice for players still trying to reach their potential.
You think like, when I get this, I'm gonna be satisfied. When I get this, I'm gonna be set. But that's not the case, because when you do get that, will you be satisfied? Will you be fulfilled? And I can guarantee you, if you're chasing money, if you all are chasing money in this room, I would tell you all to stop. Chase your purpose. Chase a better version of yourself. Because I say this, if you get that money, you get what you want. Only thing that comes out is your bigger flaws. The real you shows up. I see it time and time again in NFL, and I'm not perfect, I make mistakes, but I see it so many times. Your vices shows up loud and bright when you have that money. Because you're so fulfilling, you're trying so hard to get that money. But if you chase your purpose, you chase a better version of you, the money will chase you, guys. the opportunities will chase you. No, you won't have to beg for an opportunity. The opportunity will be begging to have you.
I'm telling you, we got leaders and the right kind of guys all over this team. But also, if you were struggling to find a certain level of play, what other situation would you want to join than Philly? Now, I know there's leaders being lost on the defense in Brandon Graham, Darius Slay, and C.J. Gardner-Johnson. Yet hearing BG talk about it, I think we're going to be just fine.
Who gonna step up in a big way this year? I mean, I know Nolan. I already be talking with him. We always, converse because we both rehabbing our tricep, and seeing him, I know that I'm like, man, it went from not even my room because I wanted Sweaty to feel not the pressure. I want him to be able to voice his opinion, be out there, man. This your room, man. Like, I'm just here. Yeah, I'm the vet, but if you need me, I'm here. But we listening to you. We seeing you every day because you the starter. This your team, and now I'm Nolan. It's like, man, you the one. You the one now. Mm-hmm. When the guys come in.
He stepped up too, man.
He did, man. I'm proud of him.
A lot of strides, man. He gave me fits in the game.
It was interesting because the play in the run was always the knock. It's like he's lighter, and how's he going to do it? And, man, he would cut pulling tackles trying to kick him out.
He's got heavy hands, man. He's setting the edge.
Oh, he got heavy hand. And no gloves, too. Like, that's the thing, man. I got much respect.
Look, the more thought I've given it, I'm not worried about losing the veterans, nor am I concerned about losing C.J. Gardner-Johnson and that fire, swagger, passion, all that he brought to the team. Because just like Zach Baun said, he's excited to run it back with the guys the Birds still have. And not only that, but there's guys we will most definitely add through the draft. Which, let's just say, having the eye for talent that Vic Fangio does should put your mind at ease, as the DC shared more specifics of what it took for him to realize Zach Baun would be better at an off-ball linebacker position than edge rusher.
And how he had a vision for him as being an edge player for us and being a good special teams player. And I watched him just a couple times during their games. He would, if they got the tight end off and motioned him across, he would back off and look like an inside linebacker, a stacked linebacker. And it only happened about 5 or 6 times. And the way he was moving when he got back there, it's just, and I can't explain it. It's just, you've watched 40 years of NFL film and coaching linebackers. I said, man, I think this guy could be an inside linebacker.
Yeah, he turned an edge rusher and special teamer into a first-team All-Pro linebacker. Granted, I think we all realize that's not the norm, but just to have the confidence in maximizing a player's potential can be a game changer. Therefore, I'll say it again, keep an eye out for all these top 30 visits because the Eagles are doing their homework, especially lately, with the most recent visit being Texas A&M edge rusher Nic Scourton. Now, Nick has been a guy that I previously mentioned as one who would get a visit, but after he posted a pic of him and BG at the NovaCare complex, that definitely generated some buzz. Because I'm not going to lie, but BG is 6'2", 265 pounds. And those of you who follow the channel know that we've had a couple of chances to not only interview BG, but also meet him in person. So when I see a dude in Nic Scourton simply towering over 55 and making him look small, that is flat out wild. However, as if that's not crazy enough, that was actually a slimmed down version of Scourton. Since remember, his playing weight was around 280, but he's now gotten down closer to 260 in hopes of regaining some of that speed and quickness he had prior to transferring to A&M. Again, I've talked about Scourton previously, but if he ended up landing at the Eagles at 32 or even a more realistic scenario of trading back and getting him, I would be very happy about it. However, the more you dig into the trends and recent history of Howie Roseman and what he might do, it's a trade-up scenario that may make more sense. Which is why I got Eagles writer Anthony DiBona on to share his perspective there, talk about the latest top 30 visits, and all the other news around the Birds.
Why do you think the Eagles may not be trading back?
So it's such an interesting draft class because, you hear about it from a ton of people at this point where it just seems like between almost like the 15 to 20 range to all the way to like 50 or even 60, there's just not really a consensus where this player is top 20. This player is like, you could see a guy that's 15th overall on one guy's board be 60th or even lower in another person's board. And there's 2 examples in particular. I tweeted about 7 actually of the Eagles, out of the Eagles top 30 visits that have been reported, but just the variance in the rankings based on these different outlets or different analysts that you look at. And for example, Donovan Ezeiruaku, who's an edge from Boston College that's linked to the Eagles a lot. So if you look at Pro Football Focus's big board or their mock draft simulator, he's rated 15th overall. But then if you look at a guy like Fran Duffy of PHLY, who formerly worked for the Eagles, he has him as the 83rd overall player on his ranking. So that's just a drastic disparity and an example of that range there. And then you look at a guy like Josh Connerly on the other side of the ball, offensive lineman from Oregon. He's rated as high as 23rd overall by Dane Brugler. And then as low as, if you look at Fran Duffy, once again, 57th overall. If you look at Pro Football Focus, he's 35th overall. So there's just such a range. And I feel like some people might view that and say, oh, it's more of a reason for the Eagles to trade back because maybe they can get the guy that they like a little bit later. But also it could be the flip side of that, which is what I'm leaning more towards, where if you take that risk of dropping back a couple spots, maybe some people are saying dropping back 10, 15 spots, like there's no guarantee that guy's going to fall to you. So if they have a guy that they really like at 32, I feel like you have to take him there because the chances of him falling to 40 or 45, or if you want to wait and don't trade back all the way to 64, it's very unlikely because of this drastic range. And that's why I'm almost leaning more towards them trading up, because there are a couple guys that could fall, especially if it seems like there's a more momentum going towards quarterbacks now, where there might be 3 or 4 quarterbacks drafted before the Eagles are even on the clock. That means more talent at other positions obviously would fall down the board. And just looking at Howie Roseman's history, since 2010, Jimmy Kempski put out a great article where the Eagles have only traded back in the in the first round 3 times. And 2 of those times they actually traded back up. One of those was for Devontae Smith. The other one was for Dallas Goedert. So the only time they actually traded back and stayed back was Marcus Smith, and we all know how that went. So, I mean, if you look at the history of Howie Roseman and just the way that this draft is projected, I don't think trading back is really much of an option. I mean, technically it is going to be an option. You know me with my percentage history. I'm not going to rule anything out. But I think the play this year might be sticking at 32 or moving up, if anything.
You had to bring up Marcus Smith. It's factual, so you throw that out there. That's fair. The devil's advocate, and as I was texting you about this earlier today as well, but the devil's advocate is that, never say never. It's not ever a 0% chance, as you alluded to. But Saquon Barkley, we look at paying a linebacker in a Zach Baun. We look at drafting a cornerback, drafting 2 cornerbacks last year, especially for that high that Howie Roseman did. So it's not impossible. But I do think that you bring up a very valid point. So kudos to you, sir, for doing the research, the digging there. Also, Jimmy Kempski, like the knowledge that you said. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here because right before you recorded, you brought up a great point, and I think that it needs to be shared just in case. Now, this is maybe perhaps put on your tinfoil hats, but you mentioned Fran Duffy and the discrepancy of, look, everyone's got all these different big boards, and anybody that follows even the draft remotely close can see that, knows it. You look at the different mock draft simulators. You can get one guy really early. You can get one guy really late, vice versa. But Fran Duffy being so far off on a lot of these players compared to the other big names that you mentioned there, is it maybe worth noting?
I mean, it's definitely interesting. And like I said, we talked about it a little bit before we started recording. But if you think about Fran Duffy just as an analyst, he was always pretty much in the Eagles building. He kind of grew up, if you want to say, like in that building, and kind of grew as a scout, grew as an analyst, and did great work, obviously, for the team. And now this is kind of the first year where he's been set free in a sense, where now he's with PHLY, obviously, next to Zach Berman and Bo Wolf. Bo Wolf also worked for the Eagles as well. So just a great platform to begin with. I mean, if you become a diehard, you have access to all their information, all great content, which is, there's not a paid advertisement, but I just love great content. I always support that. So I'm a big fan of their stuff. But it definitely is interesting to see how drastic of a difference there is, like I said, for a guy like Donovan Ezeiruaku, where Dane Brugler, who's puts out the beast for The Athletic, one of the most knowledgeable and insightful resources that you could have as far as the NFL draft, he has Ezeiruaku as his 22nd overall player, and Fran Duffy has him 83rd. I mean, that's a drastic difference. And a part of me kind of wonders.
Talking about 2 rounds difference.
Yeah, exactly. It's like part of me actually wonders if there's any correlation with how Fran Duffy analyzes prospects and how maybe Howie Roseman or other guys in the Eagles building kind of analyze prospects. It doesn't, obviously he's his own person. He has his own way of thinking. But like I said, he did grow up pretty much in this building as an analyst and as a scout, and the way that he views the film and things like that. So it is interesting to kind of see, especially after this year, because this is the first time that Fran Duffy's draft rankings and things like that have actually been public knowledge. So I'm really excited to see how the board falls and how his rankings kind of correlate to that.
All right, before we continue with this awesome interview with the Ant-Man, I got to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's video, Arena Club. Because I don't know about you, but I used to be all into card collecting and trading cards, especially right around the draft time to see who the Eagles got. However, as I got older, I stopped having the time or space to store my collection. And then after several moves, let's just say I might have misplaced a lot of those cards. But with arenaclub.com, I don't have that issue and can get rid of all those binders and boxes. Which is exactly why collector Brian Lee and Hall of Famer Derek Jeter launched Arena Club. Because Arena Club is a place where you can show cards and collections while buying, selling, and trading instantly. And right now, when you go to arenaclub.com/Philly and use my code Philly, you can get up to 20% off your first slab pack or card purchase. Honestly, the best part is this thing is super easy to navigate whether you're on the app or on your laptop. Plus, every time you rip a slab pack, Arena Club will make you an instant offer for your card based on its market value. That's right, no guessing, no waiting, you'll get an instant offer of 90% of the estimated value, where then you can accept it on the spot, simple, fast, and risk-free. So go ahead and try them out today. Again, that's code Philly at arenaclub.com/Philly to get up to 20% off your first slab pack or card purchase.
Okay, we look at 32, and we talked about the different scenarios of trade up, trade back, stay put, whatever. But as of today, put you in a little prediction mindset here, but who do you envision the Eagles kind of being that top target or most realistic chance at 32?
So I'm going to be kind of boring and kind of stick to what I've said before, I believe, when we recorded other episodes. And if they stay at 32, I feel like Donovan Ezeiruaku, if he is there, it just feels like such an obvious fit, like for so many reasons for the Eagles. Obviously, they have a bit of a need on the edge. The two guys that they added in the offseason are one-year deals in Azeez Ojulari and Josh Uche. But Nolan Smith, Jalen Hunt, obviously both showed a ton of promise. But I feel like in Vic Fangio's scheme where he wants to rotate a little bit, it feels like Donovan Ezeiruaku was a perfect fit as far as he has all the traits that you look for, that like a Howie Roseman would look for with his length and things like that, his power, his speed, all the moves that he has, his pass rush repertoire, but just his attitude on and off the field too, right? Like he's a leader, the way he talks off the field, he just sounds like a guy that would want to play for Nick Sirianni and succeed next to these guys. So if they stay at 32, it feels like he's the guy. But then in a potential trade up, I feel like that's where things get interesting because we've seen Howie Roseman kind of trade up in the past where he makes a little bit of a jump here and there. And as I said before, if 3 or 4 quarterbacks go before the Eagles are on the clock, that means guys like, I don't know, the Georgia guys, Michael Williams, Malachi Starks might fall. Tight end like Colston Loveland from Michigan might fall. Everybody's favorite target for the Eagles, Walter Nolan, might fall. So those 4 guys I feel like would be ideal trade-up targets for the Eagles. And that's why I kind of feel like a move up from 32 is a lot more likely than a move back from 32.
Well, you know my thoughts of Walter Nolan, as everyone else just about to. But yes, if you're trade up, Walter Nolan's still available. I'm 100% on board there. But I will bring up another guy, not necessarily at the level of an Ezeiruaku in terms of who you might want or rankings, but is certainly noteworthy because he came in for a top 30 visit recently with Philly, and that's Texas A&M edge rusher Nic Scourton, who, I mean, I texted you about this, and you see it kind of blowing up on social media, but took a picture with Brandon Graham at the NovaCare Complex. It's difficult to make BG look small, but Nic Scourton definitely managed to do so. Thoughts on him potential with this Fangio defense?
Well, it's funny because the visit was reported like a couple of days ago, and I had it on my tracker for Philly Sports Network, and I kind of mentioned it to you at the time. Out of all these 3 Texas A&M defensive linemen, we talk about Shamar Stewart, Shamar Turner, and Nic Scourton. It feels like I texted it to you separately. I said Nic Scourton's more of the ideal fit for the Eagles as far as those 3. So, I mean, they haven't brought in Stewart for a visit, but Scourton ironically played kind of a BG role for Texas A&M in his only season there last year, where he was asked to put on a little bit more weight. Before, he was more of a stand-up outside rusher at Purdue, and then when he went there, it was more of like, hey, put on a little bit of weight. I want you to take on these double teams. I want you to free up these other guys. But ironically, he still had 5 sacks and outproduced the other 2 that are going to be potentially drafted ahead of him or whatever the case might be. So I just think he's only 20 years old. Like you said, he's massive. You saw him next to Brandon Graham. Like, you honestly could have asked me, like, look, or if you just asked a random fan, like, who's the retired guy and who's like the guy that's about to go into the draft, and you might not know because Nic Scourton certainly looks a lot older than 20 years old. So, I mean, just the way that he's going to fill out his body, I feel like, and just the potential he already has an impressive pass rush like repertoire. I mean, if you put on the tape against Texas A&M against LSU, he pulled a couple spin moves on Will Campbell, who might be the number 1 offensive tackle in this draft when it's all said and done. And I mean, he didn't necessarily get sacks off of it, but he put pressure on the quarterback and forced him to move off his spot. So just plenty to like on tape. Sounds like he's a great person off the field, all things positive there as well, which isn't necessarily the case with some of the other guys at Texas A&M. So Scourton is definitely somebody that if they don't go with Ezeiruaku, I feel like he is a strong candidate at 32.
For anybody who is not, by the way, I'll just mention this real quickly, but not following Anthony, you definitely should be doing so. But there's the official Twitter at DiBona NFL. So there's the account. I've got it linked in the description as well. But check it out for the tracker. It is the best in the business. Kudos to you, sir, for always tracking that and keeping us up to date. I will say, going back to the Will Campbell comment, though, even though they were not sacks, as you mentioned, you create pressures there. And my immediate thought was like, man, could you imagine this guy with Nolan Smith on the other edge? And, you know, because it's always a combination. It's the pass rush, the coverage, it's a marriage there. The blend of all sides got to be able to work together. But creating those pressures and Nolan able to get through with also pressures, some sacks. And then all of a sudden, I really just stumbled upon this because I was watching some of the tape. Nic Scourton's celebration, his sack celebration, is almost identical to Nolan's. And for people that did not realize, I certainly did not realize that. But then, of course, immediately, then I'm texting you, I'm tweeting it out. But the roll the dice celebration, it's basically the same. So are we saying there's something that we should read in between this, or I don't know, just a random coincidence, probably?
Well, for anybody that watched during the season, I remember I told you when Jalix Hunt broke out the bow and arrow, and then obviously when Nolan Smith broke out the rolling the dice, I said that's kind of a key part of being a great pass rusher. You got to have that signature sack celebration. Obviously, I'm being a little bit sarcastic, but it is good to kind of have that confidence too. And if you're getting to the quarterback enough to have a celebration and for people to take notice, obviously that means you're getting to the quarterback. And Nic Scourton didn't just roll the dice. He had a couple other dance moves and stuff that he threw in there after sacking the quarterback. He had 5 sacks last season after having 10 the prior year. Like I said, he kind of took on a different role after transferring and was asked to do a little bit of different things. But I also kind of wonder if the Eagles would view him as not obviously a Milton Williams replacement full-time, but the fact that he did play a little bit on the inside, I wonder if you would be able to just have kind of you have Nolan Smith, Jalen Carter, Nic Scourton, and then Jalix Hunt. You have all 4 of those guys on the field together. I feel, especially on like a passing down, I feel like that would be a really interesting look and able to mix things up for Vic Fangio on the defensive front.
Hey, now, he's got that ability. Come on. And if it'd be interesting as well, because we've talked about like he was 280, 285, losing the weight, getting quicker. And if people watch his film or tape at Purdue, it was a kind of a different type of player, as you've been talking about. But that's it. That's interesting there. I could certainly see that, because you want to have those guys out there. Jalen Carter's going to for sure demand a double team like every single time. So then you say, okay, Nolan Smith, Jalix Hunt, Nic Scourton. You have others, we're not forgetting Moro Jomo, and don't know if JD will be out there for too many pass rushing downs, but Ezeiruaku, Josh Uche. So I like the depth. I feel like there will be some sort of defensive lineman taken, but I am curious because this has been a little bit more of a conversation, argument, debate that I've seen a couple times on social media. Do you feel like it's more of a need to draft a defensive lineman first, or is it more of a need for cornerback? Because we have had conversations about, Kelee, Ringo, where that falls. But first, I think the inclination is like, okay, Howie Roseman, he has the just foregone conclusion, like he's going to draft in the trenches. But be that as it may, I'm just saying in terms of the Eagles itself or themselves, do you go D-line or do you think cornerback more than need?
Well, before last season, it feels like it would be easy to say, oh, definitely D-line, right? But then, like, Howie Roseman kind of broke all of his rules last season, obviously with signing Saquon Barkley, and then now even this offseason, signing Zach Baun to the extension, and then Cooper DeJean, Quinyon Mitchell last year. So, obviously, it seems like cornerback is in play at 32, right? Especially if you look at the players that they've brought in on visits, and like a Trey Amos and Maxwell Hairston. Like, there's guys that are in that range, projected to go in that range that the Eagles have looked for at cornerback. But at the same time, a lot of people are a lot higher on Kelee Ringo than I am personally. I think last season kind of said a lot where he didn't really get much action, especially with Ezeiruaku stepping in whenever Darius Slay was hurt. It seemed like, I know Christian Parker spoke highly of Kelee Ringo, but I'm just not sure if I'm buying that he's definitely going to be the starter opposite Quinyon Mitchell on the outside. So I could definitely see them making a move at 32. But then again, if you look at the additions that they made in free agency, they actually added a cornerback with experience in Adoree Jackson, and they haven't really added anybody along the interior defensive line. They added 2 guys on the edge in Ezeiruaku and Josh Uche, but they haven't added anybody on the interior. And obviously they lost Milton Williams, and I guess Brandon Graham in a sense kind of played a little bit along the interior. So I would personally lean more towards the interior defensive line right now than I would necessarily cornerback as a bigger weakness.
Okay, and that's fair. There's also, I guess, on that note, a Tyleik Williams brought in for a top 30 visit, I believe. It's kind of difficult to know for sure whenever sometimes the reports are like a pre-draft meeting or met with the Eagles, but not officially people saying like a top 30 visit. But I believe we had it confirmed that Tyleik Williams was a top 30 visit. So Ohio State interior defensive lineman, that probably is more so of filling that void. Thoughts on him? Yeah,
so I thought Tyleik Williams, so people were like, oh, he's a pure nose tackle. There's no way he would be like a Milton Williams replacement because of his size. I feel like, but when you watch the film, I don't think he was really like yeah, sure enough, he can play like nose tackle full time and be kind of that Jordan Davis insurance, and then maybe eventual replacement if they don't sign him to an extension. But I feel like he has the versatility and the speed and the power to kind of play that in that Milton Williams role. I don't think it'll be the same amount of snaps. Granted, I don't think he's going to play 500, 600 snaps in that area, but I think he can do both, and he would kind of provide insurance at both spots. Where as if Moro Ojomo could be the starter for to begin the season, and then he can kind of back up both Jordan Davis and Moro Ojomo in those two spots, not necessarily play full time at either one. But I think he has the versatility and the size and the athleticism to kind of do both. So I see a lot of people writing him off as just, oh, he'd strictly be a Jordan Davis backup and replacement in that area, where I don't think that's the case. And one of the very first mock drafts that I did, I don't even think I was an article. I think I just posted like a screenshot on Twitter, was Tyler Williams to the Eagles at 32. But it seems like now he's dropped a little bit down. I mean, I don't think the athletic testing was where people thought it was going to be and hasn't really impressed in the drills or whatnot. But at the same time, it's like you see a guy that big and he's like hitting spin moves during the combine or things like that. It's just like that stands out a little bit too. So I think there's a lot to like there, a lot of upside. I would think, and if they do trade back, he'd probably be more of a target because I don't think he would last until 64. But it's going to be interesting to see where he goes. And if he lands in Philadelphia, I think he is more than just a nose tackle.
It's maybe a safer bet to go, Big Ten instead of SEC. Because we had this conversation before. There's a ton of guys all over the place. So it's not just Ole Miss, but that's where I'm going with this one, because I look at the Ole Miss guys and I'm like, man, Walter Nolan, sure, yes. But J.J. Pegues, like the versatility of that alone, but then also the interior defensive line, Jared Ivey, we've talked about, obviously, with the others, Prince, I can't even pronounce his last name, but you know who I'm referring to.
Princely Manly Man or something like that. I forget. I'm going to botch that last name.
I wasn't even going to attempt to try to say. But anyway, there's a lot of Ole Miss guys. And then Trey Amos, of course, cornerback. So lots of different players. But then we had the, kind of topic or conversation. Do you bring in too many SEC guys for another school? And then it's like, well, you get the Philly Dogs, but can you have those other ones? That's a joke, obviously, because they're going to bring in the best players. But, it's just an interesting argument. And I'm curious, though, yes, with Tyler Williams, where he might fall as you talk about. Do you trade back in that scenario? Lots of guys that you could go in that same range. I mean, it feels like the Maxwell Hairstons of the world, TJ Sanders, all these guys, they're like, and you never know. Some guys are going to fall, sure. But it's like, it feels like a lot of those would go in between 32 and 64. So do you trade back, or you have all the draft capital from the next, this draft and the next draft? Do you move up from 64 and say, okay, we took in at 32, or maybe you took a little bit earlier, we're going to trade up again, go get a player? That's the part I think that fascinates me, is there's so many different options with where they're at in this draft. I am hopeful that they figure out a way, I will say, and there's lots of guys on the radar, but to figure out a way to get Trey Amos, the more that I watch of him and you think about, like, man, you get Quinn Mitchell, Trey Amos, Cooper DeJean, I mean, like, come on. The secondary with the youth, but having one of the most dominant secondaries there, I would be a very big fan of that. Hypothetically speaking, if Trey Amos did make it to Philly, you in favor of that, the fit with Fangio's defense and Christian Parker?
It's funny because I love both him and Maxwell Hairston as far as just like personally, like what I look for in cornerbacks as far as like their aggressiveness, how well they can play. Like when the ball is in the air, they're both very competitive for the ball. Their willingness to tackle, which is something that maybe it's the Jim Schwartz in me, where it's just like, I love cornerbacks that are willing to tackle and like get in against the run game, where there are a lot of guys that just like shy away away from contact, which obviously you didn't see that with Quinn Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Those are two guys that are willing, and it feels like something that Vic Fangio kind of likes to see in his cornerback. So, I mean, Trey Amos does it all, and it's just like people say like he's a guaranteed cornerback number 2. They don't know if he's a cornerback 1, which is exactly what the Eagles would need. So it just feels like a perfect situation for him to land in, and kind of, like you said, you just have that set foundation at cornerback with those three for at least the next 3, 4, maybe a decade. Who knows? It's just like you have that set, and the promise that they all play very similarly in terms of how competitive they are, the trash talking, letting people know after the play with the celebrations. It's just a perfect fit. But maybe they make like a Cooper DeJean kind of jump like they did last year in the second round, where they see their guy falling, and if it's Trey Amos or somebody else, they're just like, hey, let's package a couple picks. We have those future picks, like you mentioned, with the compensatory picks coming down the pipeline. They can just trade the third round that they do have next year, or the second round pick that they do have next year, knowing that they have more coming around the corner. So it's definitely a chance for Howie Roseman to get aggressive. And like you said, the players that they've brought in on these top 30 visits pretty much all fall in that range for the most part. There are obviously some others, but a lot of them in that range. So it'll be interesting to see how Howie Roseman kind of navigates the draft board.
If the Eagles end up having 3 cornerbacks like that on rookie deals, we've talked about this before, but contracts have gone up for all sorts of positions, but it's not always we got a rookie quarterback, right? Or we got a quarterback on a rookie contract, so now we can go pay these other players. It doesn't have to be. Like, that is the kind of general consensus. Okay, make that right connection and then go out and do it. But Jalen Hurts is getting paid. Good on Howie to get it done early, because now you look where his contract is. And you're like, hey, that's an absolute steal. But then if you can get 3 starting cornerbacks on rookie deals, we look at Derek Stingley, we look at others that are getting their contracts done and I mean, just skyrocketing with the salary cap in itself. But if your cornerbacks are that good and playing at that level, mathematically you could argue and say, well, we got guys that potentially between all 3 of them could be worth like $100 million or almost that in terms of the salary cap. So, you know, a different way of thinking, but if they keep hitting on this youth for the defense, it's kind of a win-win. You say, okay, fine, we're paying all this money for the offense, but we got these young guys on defense. Eventually you're going to have to pay, sure. And, you know, there's other decisions that have been made or may be getting made because of that. And I'm thinking of Dallas Goedert, mainly one of those, because we've still not gotten a contract yet. But it's also strange because Philly has not had a top 30 visit yet at the time of this recording with a tight end. Is that there's still a couple openings to do that? Is that odd? Is that straight? Does it tell us anything for Dallas Goedert there?
I mean, like you said, it's definitely interesting. But as of right now, there are 21 visits that were reported, assuming all of those went through. There are 9 that are still unknown. But right now, none of those have been with tight ends, like you mentioned. And it's definitely odd because they're bringing in guys like at running back, which you don't really think of it as a need at all. And it's just like, okay, they're utilizing Visit on that, but not at tight end, especially given all the smoke, like you said, surrounding the Dallas Goedert potentially being traded. So maybe it means that Dallas Goedert's going to stick around, but it certainly seems like the way a lot of people are talking that he is going to be eventually traded or possibly even just straight up cut after June 1st, which I know would probably drive a lot of Eagles fans crazy, but it seems like the potential reality of the situation. But I wouldn't panic too much as far as the lack of visits for at tight end, and I tweeted about this as well, but they did have formal meetings, which is pretty much the second most like exclusive interaction you could have with a player because teams are only allowed 45 of those at the combine. So obviously the top 30 visits are limited to 30 players, and this is 45 players, but they did utilize 2 of those, at least that were reported, with Mason Taylor from LSU and Gunnar Helm from Texas, who are 2 of the more highly regarded tight ends in the draft that are more so day 2 prospects. But Taylor is now getting kind of late first round buzz, where I think Daniel Jeremiah had him 32nd in his most recent player rankings, which is obviously a little interesting considering that the Eagles pick at 32 and he has some Philadelphia insight. So that's something to keep an eye on. But outside of that, they have had multiple meetings with Nebraska tight end Thomas Fidone. So I don't know if that's the Italian connection where they want a Fidone along with a Sirianni and a Patullo and a DeSandro, but maybe that's something else. And then obviously Harold Fannin Jr., they have the connection with their quarterback coach now at Bowling Green. So he'll have more insight than pretty much anybody else around the league as far as what Harold Fannin can do, how he is off the field. So they have more than enough knowledge as far as the tight end class as a whole. And then obviously Tyler Warren's thought of as one of the most clean prospects in the draft, but he's not going to fall to the Eagles. That doesn't seem likely at all. And Colston Loveland, I mean, maybe there's a chance that he falls, but it seems like in most mock drafts, he's going to either the Chargers or the Colts if he does fall past any other teams that are tight end needy. So we'll see what happens, but I wouldn't panic too much about the lack of visits with tight ends right now.
Okay. Your favorite, most realistic, I should put that disclaimer, your favorite, most realistic tight end option for the Eagles is, I think I know this.
I mean, you might think it's going to be Mason Taylor, but it's actually Harold Fannin Jr. I just love
Okay, I was
Jr.
wrong.
Just like,
I was okay.
You were thinking Mason. I mean, Mason Taylor is more of like the Dallas Goedert, like 1-for-1 replacement as far as like the size, and he has blocking experience. He has work to do as a blocker, but just like the catch, like the stuff after the catch, things like that. But I just think Harold Fannin Jr. would bring such like a unique aspect to the Eagles offense, and especially with how they were using like a fullback last year. I mean, people think Fannin might be a fullback like full time, which I don't agree with, but just the way he was utilized. I mean, Wildcat quarterback. In line, in the slot, outside, led the nation in receptions, receiving yard. He put up ridiculous numbers. He basically was Bowling Green's offense, and he had really like strong performances that get against great defenses as well. Pretty much these teams knew that he was the guy, and they still couldn't stop him. So I just think he would bring like kind of like a unique flair to the tight end room in Philadelphia. And I mean, I don't know if he'd definitely be a 1-for-1 Dallas Goedert replacement, but I mean, if you're pairing him with the guys that they brought in this offseason on those 1-year deals, maybe they can make it work with some type of rotation.
Okay. Well, you didn't bite on the LSU bait there. I thought you were going to say Mason Taylor. I know that you're high on it, but I thought it would be number one. That's interesting there. But I can totally you make very valid points. I will say that for real fan.
He's almost got like Mason Taylor is almost. I feel like I was talking about him when he was like a third, fourth round projected pick, and now he's getting like first round hype, and I'm almost like, I don't know if he's worth like the 32nd overall pick. Like that might be a little bit too high, like too rich for me. So it's like maybe if he falls to the second round, or if they trade up in the second round, kind of like the Cooper DeJean trade last year, that would be a little bit more fitting for Mason Taylor. But 32 might be a little bit rich, which seems like it might be the range for him right now.
That's fair. I think one of the mock drafts that I did was like a third round pick, I believe, for Mason Taylor. So that would be good. I would absolutely take it. But I'm with you. If it's at 32, that's probably a little bit too high. I don't know. We did get an LSU player, speaking of, in the former second rounder, right? Terrace Marshall Jr., the wide receiver, the phenom. This is going to be a big move for us. I saw some people going like, oh my gosh, this is a huge, massive. And I also saw people like, yeah, we'll see. It's a body.
I'd like to think for the most part that those are mostly sarcastic like predictions, because it feels like for the last, I think he was in trade rumors in like his second year in Carolina, and that's when a lot of people wanted the Eagles, including myself, to like take a chance on him because we thought there was still something worth like developing there. But now it's kind of like he's been in Carolina, he was with San Francisco for a little bit, then he was with Las Vegas, like hasn't really shown anything anywhere. So I mean, only played 14 special team snaps in his career. And I mean, if you're going to be a depth wide receiver for the Eagles, you're going to have to play special teams. Johnny Wilson played over 100 special team snaps last season. So it's kind of seems like more of like the Julio Jones, Paris Campbell kind of veteran addition where like don't really have much, like you're not really expecting much for them. But I personally don't even know if he's going to make the roster. I would kind of be surprised if he did, because I think they might add maybe a receiver late in day 3 or potentially like an undrafted free agent or something like that. But Terrace Marshall just seems like more of a camp body than a guy that's really going to push for a significant role in Philadelphia.
I tend to agree. Yeah. It'd be awesome if, change of culture, the right mindset, guys like A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith to look up to, shifts because if I'm not mistaken, the whole, well, not the entire, but a lot of the knock was like you just focus, intensity, work ethic, drive, like just the want to go out there and do that. So, go into Philly, have the change of scenery, perhaps changes a little bit of something. But we've seen guys come over before, and I mean, not to knock Jahan Dotson, but like he had 220 yards receiving for the entire year. There's only so many mouths to feed as it is. So if anything, if he makes the roster, it's a depth addition. Okay, cool. Perhaps he's able to be a fill-in for a game or two if you have some injuries. But ideally, I mean, that's kind of best case scenario. And I wouldn't be surprised either if it's like, well, okay, practice squad, you tried, good job, move on. Like, nothing major.
The biggest thing that kind of stuck out with me about when it happened, and I tweeted it kind of sarcastically a little bit when it first happened, was like just Howie Roseman pretty much doing what Howie Roseman does, where it was athletically gifted, like high RAS score in that regard, former high draft pick that's still pretty young, like just coming off their rookie contract, or they were released off their rookie contract, whatever. Like almost all of these guys that they've added in free agency this offseason are either coming off their rookie contract or maybe 1 year after their rookie contract ended, where these guys are still 24, 25, 26. Like they haven't necessarily hit their potential with other teams, but now it's just Howie Roseman betting on the culture in Philadelphia, kind of getting the best out of these guys. It has worked with some guys. It hasn't worked with others, but it's really like no risk at this point because what he's getting is probably close to the veteran minimum with no guaranteed money or very little guaranteed money. So why not at that point? If you just have him compete in training camp, maybe he does push Johnny Wilson for a spot or Anaya Smith or something else like that. I mean, obviously Britton Covey's not there anymore, so there's going to be maybe a roster spot or two that's available, but it's going to come down to, like you said, him putting his head down, working, maybe being willing to play special teams, and then going from there.
We'll see. It's always the interesting battles, but yeah, maybe not the major one as of right now, but it's the continual Howie Roseman. Sometimes he makes these moves that are very much telling. We're like, okay, yep, that's what we expect. Other times he does not, and he surprises people. So will he trade back? Who knows? Let us know in the comments what you think about it. You expect the Eagles to trade back? Is that more likely? Trade up? Stay put at 32? Who are your favorite targets? Everything else about what we discussed here, you can agree to disagree if we need to. But Anthony, appreciate you coming on as always. Make sure to go follow him, of course, at DiBona NFL. And lots more content. We will have a joint mock draft at some point. We have not nailed down a date, but I know that both of us were going to try to make that happen at some point. So stay tuned. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Go Birds.